Morning arrived gently. Not with alarms. Not with urgency. But with light. Soft sunlight slipped through the living room window, stretching across the hardwood floor in slow, golden lines. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, catching the glow like tiny sparks. The house felt calm. Familiar. Safe. It was the kind of morning that didn't ask for attention. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, one hand wrapped around a warm coffee mug. Steam rose quietly, carrying the faint smell of roasted beans. Outside, a distant car passed. Somewhere down the street, a door closed. Normal sounds. Normal life. He exhaled. Long and tired. The week had been heavy. Work emails that never ended. Late nights staring at the ceiling. Thoughts that followed him even into sleep. This morning felt like a small reward, a pause before the day asked for more. At his feet, Max lay stretched out on the rug. A German shepherd. Large, calm, steady. His fur caught the sunlight, deep tan and black, soft where the light touched him. His chest rose and fell in an easy rhythm. One ear flicked occasionally, tuned to the world even while resting. Max always did that. Always listening. Always aware. Ethan glanced down and smiled faintly. "You good, buddy?" he murmured. Max didn't move. But his tail gave a slow, reassuring thump against the floor. The house settled again. Coffee. Quiet. Breathing. And then a bark. Not sharp. Not frantic. Just one clear sound. Ethan froze. He frowned slightly, eyes lifting toward the hallway. "Max," he said, more confused than annoyed. Max was already on his feet. His body had changed in an instant, posture straight, muscles alert, ears forward. His eyes were focused, fixed on the hallway leading deeper into the house. He barked again. Firm. Intentional. Ethan felt irritation stir before he could stop it. Hey, he said, rubbing his temple. "Not now, man." Max didn't react. He barked a third time. Then took a few steps toward the hallway. Halfway there, he stopped. And looked back. Not anxiously. Not nervously. Just expectant. As if he were waiting for Ethan to understand something important. Ethan sighed. "Seriously," he muttered. "It's too early for this." He pushed his chair back and stood, the legs scraping softly against the floor. The peaceful morning felt suddenly interrupted, cracked open by a sound he didn't yet understand. Max barked again. Same tone. Same rhythm. Ethan's voice rose, sharper than he intended. "Max, stop." The word stop hung in the air longer than he expected. Max didn't flinch. He didn't cower. Didn't retreat. He simply stood there. Focused. Grounded. Like the word hadn't been meant for him at all. That unsettled Ethan. Max was well trained. Responsive. He always listened. Always adjusted himself to Ethan's mood, especially on tired mornings like this. But today, he wasn't disobedient. He was committed. Ethan watched him more closely now. Max's chest was still. His breathing controlled. His tail wasn't tucked or wagging, just steady. His eyes held a quiet intensity Ethan hadn't noticed before. "What is it?" Ethan asked, softer now. Max turned toward the hallway again, then back to Ethan. One step forward. Pause. Another look. It felt deliberate. Ethan swallowed. The irritation ebbed, replaced by something else. Curiosity. "Did you hear something?" he asked, though the house felt completely still. No crashes. No alarms. No voices. Just sunlight and silence. Max let out a low, short bark, not loud, not demanding. More like a reminder. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He thought about the last few months. How Max had started following him from room to room more often. How he sat closer than usual. How his eyes lingered longer on Ethan's face. At the time, Ethan had brushed it off. Dogs do that, he'd told himself. But standing there now, watching Max stand so calm and so certain, it felt different. Ethan took a step toward the hallway. Max immediately turned and walked a few paces ahead, then stopped again. Waited. Ethan's heartbeat slowed. Not from fear, but from awareness. The house seemed quieter than before, as if it were holding its breath. "You're acting weird today," Ethan said quietly. Max glanced back, eyes soft but serious. No panic. No excitement. Just connection. Ethan followed. The hallway was dimmer, the sunlight fading into gentle shadow. Family photos lined the walls of vacations, birthdays, moments frozen in smiles. Max walked slowly, nails clicking softly against the floor. Click. 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 He stopped near the end of the hallway. Right outside Ethan's bedroom. He didn't bark this time. He simply stood there. Waiting. Ethan felt a subtle tightness in his chest. "This is my room," he said, as if explaining it to himself. Max sat. Perfectly. His eyes never left the door. Ethan stared at the handle. Nothing looked out of place. No sounds. No movement. And yet, something about Max's stillness felt louder than barking ever could. Ethan rested his hand on the wall, steadying himself. He thought about how often he'd rushed through mornings lately. How often he'd ignored small signals from his body, from his mind, from life. And now, maybe, from his dog. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. I'm listening." Max's ears flicked forward slightly. Ethan reached for the door handle. And paused. A strange feeling washed over him, not fear, but realization. That this moment mattered. That the barking he'd yelled at wasn't noise. It was communication. He looked down at Max one more time. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have snapped." Max's tail thumped once against the floor. Slow. Forgiving. Ethan took a breath. And turned the handle. What he was about to notice, what Max had sensed before him, would change the way Ethan understood that morning. And the dog who refused to stay silent. The bedroom looked exactly the way Ethan had left it. The bed was neatly made. Curtains half open. Morning light spilling softly across the floor. Nothing was out of place. Ethan stood in the doorway, one hand still on the handle, feeling slightly foolish for the pause he'd made. He let out a quiet breath, half relief, half embarrassment. "See," he murmured to himself. Nothing. Behind him, Max didn't move. Ethan stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of clean laundry and yesterday's aftershave. Familiar. Comforting. The kind of space that usually helped him reset before the day began. He glanced around again. Still nothing. He shook his head gently and let out a small, tired laugh. "Guess you just wanted attention, huh?" he said over his shoulder. Max didn't respond. That was strange. Usually, at the sound of Ethan's voice, especially when it softened, Max's tail would wag. He'd step forward. Lean into Ethan's leg. Offer reassurance in his own quiet way. But now, he remained in the doorway. Sitting. Watching. His body was relaxed. But his eyes were not. They tracked Ethan's movements carefully, not playfully, not eagerly, but with calm focus. As if Ethan were the one being observed. Ethan noticed. He slowed his steps. "Max," he called again. Max stood up. Not rushed. Not tense. Just deliberate. He walked into the room and stopped near the foot of the bed. His nose lifted slightly, drawing in the air. His ears angled forward, catching sounds too subtle for Ethan to register. Ethan felt a faint prickle of unease, not fear, just awareness. "What is it, boy?" he asked quietly. Max turned his head toward the nightstand. Then back to Ethan. Then toward the nightstand again. A subtle motion. Almost a suggestion. Ethan followed the line of his gaze. The nightstand held a lamp, a book, his phone, face down. Everything looked normal. Ethan stepped closer. Max took one step back. Gave him space. That caught Ethan off guard. "You're acting like you want me to notice something," Ethan said softly. Max's tail moved once. Slow. Controlled. Ethan reached for his phone. The screen lit up. 3 missed notifications. He frowned. That was odd. He usually woke to alerts, emails, reminders, calendar pings. But the phone had been silent this morning. He tapped the screen. Nothing loaded. No signal. "Ha," Ethan muttered. Max let out a quiet huff, not a bark, just a breath. Ethan glanced down. "You knew?" he asked. Max didn't blink. Ethan set the phone back down, feeling the smallest shift inside his chest. A tightening. A thought forming but not yet clear. He moved toward the window. Outside, the street looked peaceful. A neighbor watering plants. Leaves stirring in a light breeze. Normal life unfolding without interruption. Too normal. Ethan frowned again. Max stepped closer now, positioning himself between Ethan and the bed. Protective. But not tense. Almost guiding. "Okay," Ethan said under his breath. "You're definitely trying to tell me something." He sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped slightly beneath his weight. And then he felt it. A subtle wave of dizziness. Not sudden. Not sharp. Just enough to make him pause. Ethan placed a hand on the mattress to steady himself. "Whoa," he whispered. Max moved instantly. He stepped forward and pressed his shoulder gently against Ethan's leg, firm, grounding, warm. Ethan froze. Max had done this before. Months ago. During a stressful work call. When Ethan's breathing had gone shallow. Max had leaned into him then, too. At the time, Ethan had brushed it off as coincidence. But now, the memory landed differently. "You felt that?" Ethan asked quietly. Max stayed exactly where he was. Steady. Supportive. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. The room felt warmer suddenly. The air heavier. His heart beat a little faster than usual, not racing, just off rhythm. He took a breath. Then another. Max didn't move until Ethan's breathing slowed. Only then did he step back. Ethan opened his eyes. A quiet realization began to take shape. "You weren't barking to be annoying," he said softly. "You were trying to get me in here." Max sat. His eyes met Ethan's. Something passed between them, unspoken but clear. Trust. Ethan leaned back slightly on the bed, staring at the ceiling. "How long?" he asked, almost to himself. "How long have you been noticing things I don't?" Max's ears flicked. Ethan smiled faintly, though his chest still felt tight. He stood up slowly this time, careful with his movements. The dizziness didn't return, but the memory of it lingered. He walked toward the bathroom. Max followed. Not close behind, just enough to be there. Ethan turned on the sink and splashed cool water on his face. He studied his reflection in the mirror, slightly pale, eyes tired, a crease of worry forming between his brows. You need to slow down, he told himself. Behind him, Max sat quietly on the tile. Watching. Listening. Waiting. Ethan dried his hands and leaned against the counter. I yelled at you, he said quietly, not looking down. You were just doing what you do best. Max stood and stepped closer. He placed his head gently against Ethan's hip. Ethan's hand rested on Max's neck, fingers sinking into thick fur. I'm sorry, he said again. This time, it felt heavier. More honest. Max's tail wagged once. Then stopped. As if to say, it's okay. We're here now. Ethan stayed like that for a moment. Breathing. Listening. Feeling. Something was changing, not dramatically, not loudly, but in the quiet spaces where truth usually lived. Max moved away and walked back toward the bedroom. Halfway there, he paused. Looked back. Not urgent. Not demanding. Just inviting. Ethan followed. The room felt different now. Not dangerous. Not threatening. Just meaningful. Ethan sat on the bed again, slower this time. More aware of his body. Of the signals he'd been ignoring. Max lay down at his feet. Close. Protective. Ethan exhaled deeply. I think you saved me from something, he said quietly. I just don't know what yet. Max rested his chin on his paws. Calm. Certain. The mystery wasn't solved. But it was no longer invisible. And the more Ethan watched his dog, the steadiness, the timing, the patience, the more he realized. This wasn't a one-time thing. Max hadn't just reacted. He had noticed. And that gentle persistence was only the beginning. Ethan didn't rush to stand up this time. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting loosely on his knees, letting the room settle around him. Max lay at his feet, calm and present, his breathing slow and even. The rise and fall of his chest felt steady, like a quiet metronome reminding Ethan to slow down too. The dizziness didn't return. But the memory of it stayed. Ethan stared at the opposite wall, where a thin beam of sunlight traced the frame of a photograph. A picture from years ago. Ethan and Max on their first hike together. Both of them younger. Less tired. He swallowed. That wasn't normal, he said softly. Max's ears shifted at the sound of his voice. Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his thighs. I mean, I've been stressed before. Exhausted. Burned out, he continued. But that felt different. Max lifted his head and looked up at him. Not searching. Not confused. Just listening. Ethan noticed how still Max was. How intentional every movement seemed. No pacing. No whining. No restless energy. Just quiet attention. When did you start paying attention like this? Ethan asked. Max's tail moved once, then went still again. Ethan let out a small breath, half laugh, half disbelief. Or maybe, he added, you always have, and I just didn't. That thought lingered. Ethan stood slowly, testing his balance. His feet felt solid beneath him. The room didn't spin. His body felt fine. Still, something inside him had shifted. He walked toward the dresser and opened the top drawer. Socks. T-shirts. Familiar routines waiting to be followed. He picked up a shirt, then paused. Max had stood up. He wasn't blocking Ethan's path. He wasn't barking. He simply positioned himself slightly to the side. Close enough to be noticed. Ethan caught the movement in his peripheral vision. You don't want me to rush, do you? Ethan murmured. Max sat. Again. Ethan shook his head slowly, a strange smile forming. Okay, he said. I get it. I think. He closed the drawer without taking the shirt. Instead, he sat back down on the bed. The morning felt different now, stretched out, slower. As if Max had gently pressed pause on the day. Ethan reached for his phone again. Still no signal. That bothered him more than he expected. He glanced at the clock on the wall. He was already running late. Normally, that would have sparked anxiety. A quickened pulse. A sharp internal voice telling him to hurry. But today... He looked down at Max. And the urgency softened. What if, Ethan said quietly, being late isn't the worst thing today? Max lowered himself back down, resting his head against Ethan's foot. The contact was grounding. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. Images drifted through his mind. Late nights staring at spreadsheets. Skipped meals. Shallow breaths he hadn't noticed until now. He remembered times when Max had nudged his leg during long work calls. When he'd sat unusually close while Ethan paced the living room at night. All those moments he'd brushed off. All those signals he'd ignored. You were trying to help, Ethan whispered. Max didn't move. But his presence felt louder than words. Ethan stood again, slowly, and walked toward the kitchen. This time, Max didn't rush ahead or block his way. He followed at a measured distance. Watching. Ethan poured himself a glass of water instead of more coffee. He drank it slowly, feeling the coolness travel down his throat. He listened to his body. To the room. To the quiet. Max sat near the doorway, eyes tracking Ethan with the same calm focus as before. Ethan leaned against the counter. People say dogs know things, he said softly. Stuff we don't. Max blinked once. Ethan smiled faintly. I used to think that was just something people say to feel better, he admitted. Like superstition. Max's ears twitched. But now, Ethan continued, I'm not so sure. He felt a gentle wave of emotion rise, not fear, not panic. Gratitude. He crouched down and rested his forearm on his knee. Max immediately stood and stepped closer, placing his head under Ethan's hand. Ethan scratched behind his ears, slow and deliberate. Thank you, he said quietly. Max leaned into the touch. Ethan felt it then, the shift. The moment where annoyance fully dissolved. And curiosity took its place. Not curiosity about what was wrong, but curiosity about what Max knew. About how long he'd been watching. How often he'd sensed changes Ethan ignored. How deeply this bond really went. Ethan stood again, a little more centered this time. I'm not going to rush today, he said. I promise. Max stepped back and sat, satisfied. Ethan grabbed his jacket slowly and slipped it on. He checked his breathing. Steady. Calm. The day still waited for him. But now... He was listening. As he reached for the front door, Max walked ahead and stopped. He didn't bark. He simply looked back once more. Ethan paused. Not because he was dizzy. Not because he was confused. But because he understood something new. Max wasn't controlling his movements. He was inviting awareness. Ethan nodded slightly. Lead on, he said. Max turned toward the door, tail relaxed, posture confident. Whatever was unfolding. Whatever truth waited beneath this quiet morning. Ethan knew one thing for sure now. Yelling had closed his ears. Listening had opened everything else. The front door closed softly behind them. Not rushed. Not slammed. Just a gentle click that echoed through the quiet house. Ethan paused on the porch, breathing in the cool morning air. The sky was pale blue, stretched wide and calm. A faint breeze carried the scent of grass and distant trees. Max stepped beside him. Not ahead. Not pulling. Just there. Ethan slipped his hands into his jacket pockets and stood still for a moment longer than necessary. The street looked the same as always, quiet, familiar, unremarkable. And yet, everything felt different. "You've been watching me, haven't you?" Ethan said softly. Max sat at his side. Close enough that Ethan could feel his warmth through the fabric of his jeans. Ethan let out a slow breath. "I don't think I noticed how tired I'd been," he admitted. "Not really." Max's ears flicked at the sound of his voice. Ethan looked down at him. "You noticed though," he said. "You always do." The words surprised him as they left his mouth. He hadn't planned to say them. But they felt true. They started down the sidewalk together. Their pace was slower than usual. Deliberate. Each step felt intentional, like a quiet agreement between them. The rhythm of movement settled something inside Ethan. Step. Step. Max's leash hung loose in Ethan's hand. It always had. Max never pulled. Never rushed. Another small detail Ethan had taken for granted. As they walked, memories surfaced, uninvited but gentle. The day he brought Max home from the shelter. How Max had sat quietly in the back seat, watching him through the mirror. How, that first night, Max had slept beside the bed instead of on the expensive dog bed Ethan bought. Ethan smiled faintly. "You've always stayed close," he murmured. Max glanced up briefly, then returned his attention to the path ahead. They reached the small park at the end of the street. Morning light filtered through the trees, scattering warm patterns across the grass. Birds moved in soft bursts of sound above them. Ethan stopped near a bench. He sat down slowly. Max sat immediately beside him. Not because he was told to. Because he chose to. Ethan rested his elbows on his knees, staring out at the open space. "I used to think I was the one taking care of you," he said quietly. "Food. Walks. Vet visits." He chuckled under his breath. "But maybe, you've been taking care of me too." Max leaned slightly against his leg. The contact was subtle, but grounding. Ethan closed his eyes. His breathing slowed naturally this time, no effort required. His shoulders dropped. The tightness in his chest eased just a little more. He thought about the nights he'd stayed up late, staring at glowing screens. The mornings he'd skipped breakfast. The headaches he'd ignored. And through it all, Max had been there. Watching. Adjusting. Staying close. Ethan opened his eyes and looked down. "Why didn't I see it?" he asked softly. Max lifted his head and met Ethan's gaze. There was no judgment there. Just patience. Ethan reached out and rested his hand on Max's back. He felt the steady strength beneath the fur. Solid. Real. "You're not just reacting," Ethan said slowly. "You're responding." Max's tail moved once. Ethan nodded to himself. The bond between them wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was built from mornings like this. From quiet walks. From shared silence. From moments where one noticed when the other couldn't. They sat there for a long time. Long enough for the sun to climb higher. Long enough for the world to move gently around them. Eventually, Ethan stood. His body felt lighter. Not healed, but heard. "Come on," he said softly. Max stood with him. As they turned back toward home, Ethan felt a quiet certainty settle in. Whatever had happened earlier, whatever Max had sensed, it wasn't an isolated moment. It was part of something deeper. Something that had been growing quietly beneath the surface for years. And now, Ethan was finally paying attention. By the time they returned home, the sun had risen fully. Not harsh. Not glaring. Just steady. The kind of light that makes everything clearer without demanding attention. Ethan closed the front door gently behind them and stood still for a moment, listening to the quiet click of the lock. The house greeted them with familiar stillness, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of a wall clock. Max stepped inside first. As always. But instead of walking straight to his usual spot near the window, he stopped just a few feet in. His nose lifted slightly. His ears angled forward. He didn't look tense. He looked thoughtful. Ethan noticed. "You're checking again," he said quietly. Max didn't move. He stood there, reading the space the way some people read faces. Ethan slipped off his shoes and followed him in. As soon as the door closed, a subtle pressure returned to Ethan's chest, faint, easy to dismiss, but present. He paused. Normally, he would have ignored it. Today, he didn't. He rested a hand lightly against the wall and took a slow breath. The pressure didn't increase. It didn't fade either. Max turned his head toward him. Just slightly. As if to say yes. That. Pay attention to that. Ethan swallowed. "You feel it too, don't you?" he murmured. Max stepped closer. Not touching. Just close enough to be felt. Ethan moved into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. The light there was brighter now, bouncing off the countertops, filling the room with warmth. He drank slowly. Halfway through, he realized something. He wasn't thirsty. He'd just been moving on habit. That thought lingered. Max lay down near the doorway, positioning himself where he could see both Ethan and the hallway. His posture was relaxed, but intentional. Ethan leaned against the counter. That's when the memories began lining up. Not rushing in. Not dramatic. Just quietly asking to be acknowledged. The afternoon a few months ago when he'd stood up too fast and felt the room tilt, Max had immediately pressed against his leg. The evening Ethan skipped dinner and worked late, Max had refused to settle, pacing softly until Ethan finally ate something. The night Ethan woke up breathing shallow, heart racing, Max had been sitting upright on the bed, staring at him until he calmed. At the time, Ethan had laughed it off. Protective breed, he'd told people. Now. That explanation fell thin. Ethan moved to the living room and sat on the couch. The cushions sank beneath him, supportive and familiar. He rested his forearms on his knees and stared at the floor. "Those weren't random moments," he said quietly. Max lifted his head. Ethan placed 2 fingers on his wrist. Counted. The rhythm wasn't chaotic. But it wasn't steady either. A slight hesitation between beats. Nothing alarming. But enough. Max stood immediately and stepped closer. He positioned himself directly in front of Ethan, blocking his forward lean. Not aggressively. Gently. Ethan stopped moving. "You don't want me leaning forward," he realized out loud. Max held his gaze. Ethan leaned back instead, letting his shoulders rest against the couch. The pressure in his chest eased, not completely, but noticeably. Ethan let out a slow breath. A realization settled in. Max wasn't reacting to single events. He was responding to patterns. Small shifts. Subtle changes. Things that added up quietly while Ethan stayed busy ignoring them. Ethan looked at him. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. Max sat. Calm. Certain. Ethan shook his head slowly. "All this time. I thought you were just being extra clingy." Max's tail thumped once against the rug. Ethan smiled faintly, then the smile faded. "I didn't want to see it," he admitted. "Because seeing it means I have to slow down." Max moved closer and rested his head gently against Ethan's knee. The weight was comforting. Grounding. Ethan's hand settled into Max's fur automatically. He noticed how warm it felt. How steady. The room felt quieter now, not because there was less sound, but because Ethan was finally listening. "I've been pushing," he said softly. "Through tiredness. Through headaches. Through warning signs." Max stayed still. Ethan closed his eyes. Images drifted through his mind, unfinished emails, skipped meals, nights spent staring at screens long after his body asked for rest. "You noticed before I did," Ethan whispered. Max breathed out slowly, almost like a sigh. Ethan leaned back fully now, letting the couch support him. He adjusted his posture, just like Max had encouraged earlier. The pressure in his chest softened again. Not gone, but manageable. "That's what you've been doing," Ethan said. "Adjusting me." Max lifted his head slightly, eyes soft. Ethan felt a swell of emotion, not fear, not guilt. Respect. For this quiet, watchful presence that had been protecting him without words. "You barked this morning because the pattern finally crossed a line," Ethan realized. "Didn't it?" Max's ears flicked forward. Ethan exhaled slowly. "And I yelled at you." His voice dropped. "I almost missed it." Max nudged his knee gently. "Forgiving." Ethan's fingers tightened slightly in Max's fur. "Thank you," he said. "For not giving up on me." They stayed like that for a long time. The sun moved across the floor. The clock kept ticking. Nothing dramatic happened. And yet, everything felt different. Ethan stood slowly, testing his balance. He felt steady enough, but cautious now. Intentional. Max stood with him. No urgency. Just alignment. "I think," Ethan said quietly, "this is bigger than one morning." Max followed him as he walked toward the window. Outside, life went on as usual. Cars passed. Neighbors moved through their routines. Ethan rested a hand against the glass. "You've been trying to get my attention for weeks," he said. "Maybe months." Max sat beside him. Ethan nodded to himself. "Okay," he said. "I'm paying attention now." Max's tail wagged, slow and controlled. The mystery wasn't solved. Not yet. But the pieces were finally visible. And for the first time, Ethan understood something deeply important. The signs had always been there. He just hadn't been listening. The afternoon drifted in quietly. Not rushed. Not demanding. The kind of time that feels wide when you finally stop fighting it. Ethan sat on the couch with his back against the armrest, legs stretched out, hands resting loosely in his lap. The house felt warmer now, filled with soft daylight and a strange sense of calm he hadn't felt in weeks. Max lay on the rug nearby. Close enough to touch. Far enough to give space. His eyes were half closed, but not asleep. Always aware. Ethan stared at the ceiling, following the slow spin of a fan blade. His chest felt different. Not heavy like before. Not tight. But noticeable. As if his body was reminding him it existed. "I think this is the part where I usually ignore it," Ethan said quietly. Max's ears lifted slightly. Ethan turned his head and looked at him. "Or tell myself it's nothing," he continued. "Or that I'll deal with it later." Max didn't move. He didn't need to. Ethan sighed. "But later keeps getting further away." The room settled into silence again. Outside, a bird landed on the fence, chirped once, and flew off. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower hummed to life. Normal sounds. Normal life. And yet, Ethan felt like he was standing at the edge of something important. He sat up slowly and swung his legs over the side of the couch. Max lifted his head fully now. Ethan noticed the change immediately. "You're watching again," he said softly. Max stood and stepped closer. Not blocking him. Just ready. Ethan placed his feet on the floor and waited. Nothing happened. No dizziness. No sharp breath. But his heartbeat felt uneven, like it was searching for its rhythm. He rested a hand over his chest. "That's not right," he murmured. Max moved closer still, pressing his shoulder gently against Ethan's leg. Grounding. Ethan closed his eyes. For a moment, he let himself feel it, not analyze it, not explain it away. Just feel. The truth arrived quietly. "I've been afraid," Ethan admitted. The words surprised him. Max stayed pressed against him. "I didn't want to stop because stopping means admitting I'm not fine," Ethan said. "That maybe I've been running on empty longer than I thought." His throat tightened slightly. "And I didn't want to be weak." Max shifted his weight, leaning in more firmly now. Not comforting like a hug. More like an anchor. Ethan laughed softly, not amused, just honest. "You don't see it that way, do you?" he said. "You just see what is." Max breathed out slowly. Ethan opened his eyes. That was the turning point. Not the symptoms. Not the morning. This moment. The moment Ethan stopped defending himself against his own body. He stood slowly, careful and deliberate. Max stayed close. Ethan walked toward the kitchen and picked up his phone again. Still no signal. The blank screen stared back at him. Normally, that would have frustrated him. Today, it felt protective. Like the world giving him permission to pause. "I think I need help," Ethan said aloud. Saying it made his chest loosen slightly. Max's tail moved once. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said. "I know." He moved to the dining table and sat down, resting his elbows lightly on the surface. The wood felt cool beneath his skin. He stared at nothing for a moment. Then everything. Moments stacked together, the late nights, the headaches, the short breaths, the mornings where getting out of bed felt heavier than it should. And through all of it, Max. Watching. Adjusting. Persisting. "I yelled at you for barking," Ethan said quietly. "For trying to get my attention." He looked down. "I'm really sorry." Max walked over and rested his head gently against Ethan's thigh. Forgiveness offered without hesitation. Ethan's hand found Max's neck, fingers threading through thick fur. "I don't think you were trying to save me from one thing," Ethan realized. "I think you were trying to save me from myself." Max stayed still. Ethan took a deeper breath. His heart steadied slightly. Enough to make a decision. "I'm not doing this alone," he said. He stood and walked toward the landline phone mounted on the wall, an old habit he'd never bothered to remove. He picked it up. Dialed. As it rang, Ethan glanced down at Max. "You okay with this?" he asked softly. Max sat. Present. The call connected. Ethan spoke calmly. Clearly. Honestly. Not dramatic. Just truthful. He explained the symptoms. The morning. The patterns. The other voice listened carefully. When the call ended, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected. Relief. He hung up and rested his forehead briefly against the wall. "That was hard," he said quietly. Max stood beside him. "You didn't push me," Ethan said. "You waited until I was ready." He crouched down and wrapped one arm loosely around Max's shoulders. Max leaned in. Their breathing synced again. Slow. Steady. Ethan stayed there for a moment longer. Then he stood. "I think things are going to change," he said. "Not all at once." Max's tail wagged gently. "But enough," Ethan added. "Enough to matter." The house felt warmer. Safer. Not because the problem was solved, but because it was finally acknowledged. Ethan looked down at Max, eyes soft. "You didn't save me by barking," he said. "You saved me by not giving up." Max looked back at him. Calm. Certain. The turning point had passed. And nothing would feel the same again. Evening arrived without drama. The sun lowered slowly, turning the light outside the windows soft and amber. Shadows stretched across the living room floor, longer now, calmer, like the day itself was exhaling. Ethan sat quietly on the couch. Not restless. Not distracted. Waiting. Max lay at his feet, his body fully relaxed for the first time all day. His head rested on his paws, eyes half-lidded, breathing deep and even. The tension was gone. That alone told Ethan something important. "You know what's coming," Ethan said softly. Max didn't open his eyes. He didn't need to. A car door closed outside. Footsteps approached. Ethan stood slowly and walked to the door. His movements were careful, measured, not because he was afraid, but because he was finally aware of his body. When he opened the door, the evening air flowed in gently. A familiar face stood on the porch. Concerned, but calm. They spoke quietly inside, voices low, respectful of the moment. Max lifted his head briefly, watched the exchange, then settled again. Trusting. Ethan answered questions honestly this time. Not minimizing. Not brushing things aside. He described the pressure in his chest. The missed signals. The morning bark that had changed everything. And Max. Always Max. Later, they sat at the dining table, papers spread neatly in front of them. Nothing urgent. Nothing alarming. Just clarity. "You caught this early," the voice across from him said gently. "That matters." Ethan nodded. He felt something loosen in his chest, not physical this time. Emotional. "So it wasn't in my head," he said. "No," came the reply. "Your body's been asking for help." Ethan glanced down. Max was watching him now. Quiet. Steady. Like he'd been waiting for the sentence all along. That was when the truth settled fully. The barking hadn't been about danger. It hadn't been about noise or disruption. It had been about timing. Max hadn't waited until something terrible happened. He'd acted when the pattern crossed a threshold only instinct could recognize. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I didn't almost miss it," he said quietly. "I was missing it." The realization wasn't frightening. It was humbling. Later, after the house grew quiet again, Ethan sat on the floor with his back against the couch. The room glowed with lamplight, now warm, soft, forgiving. Max lay beside him. No tension. No vigilance. Just companionship. Ethan ran his fingers slowly through Max's fur, grounding himself in the texture, the warmth, the quiet presence. "You didn't wait for proof," Ethan said. "You trusted what you felt." Max shifted closer. Ethan smiled faintly. "I spent so much time telling myself to push through," he continued. "Ignore it. Be stronger." His voice dropped. "You just listened." That difference mattered. Ethan closed his eyes. The truth wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment to point to. Just a line that had been crossed quietly. And a dog who noticed. "I yelled at you for caring," Ethan whispered. Max nudged his hand gently. Forgiveness came easily to him. Ethan opened his eyes. "I don't think you saved me by barking," he said. "I think you saved me by staying consistent." The house felt settled now. Like it had accepted the truth too. Ethan rested his head back against the couch. For the first time in a long while, he felt tired, not exhausted. The good kind. The kind that comes after honesty. Max sighed contentedly and rested his head against Ethan's leg. The mystery was gone. In its place was understanding. And gratitude. The truth was simple. Quiet. And deeply human. Sometimes the most important warnings don't sound like alarms. Sometimes they sound like a dog who refuses to stop barking until you listen. Night had settled over the house like a soft blanket. The golden light of evening had faded into gentle shadows. Lamps glowed warmly, casting long, comforting shapes across the floor. The quiet was different now, not empty, but full of presence. Full of understanding. Ethan sat on the living room floor, back leaning against the couch. Max lay beside him, close, his head resting lightly against Ethan's thigh. The weight of him was grounding, steadying, familiar. Ethan ran his hand slowly along Max's back. Each stroke deliberate. Warm. Solid. The texture of fur beneath his fingers felt like reassurance itself. He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling slowly. The day had been a revelation. Not frightening, not dramatic. But deeply, gently transformative. You stayed, Ethan whispered. You never gave up on me. Max shifted slightly, pressing his shoulder into Ethan. A quiet nudge that carried more meaning than words ever could. Ethan smiled faintly, tired but calm. I didn't hear you before, he said softly. Not really. I thought it was noise. Annoyance. Something to push aside. Max rested his head more fully against him. But you were warning me, Ethan continued. Not just about today, but about everything I've been ignoring. The memories came flooding in: late nights working, skipped meals, shallow breathing, the moments when Ethan felt too tired to care. And in every one of them, Max had been present, steady, observant. Ethan exhaled again, this time slower. And I finally get it. I finally see it. He leaned his forehead gently against Max's fur. The contact was grounding. It felt like coming home, like finally breathing after holding it in for too long. Outside, the wind rustled softly in the trees. The distant sounds of life carried into the quiet house. But inside, time seemed paused. Moments stretched like warm honey. I don't think you just saved me this morning, Ethan whispered. I think you've been saving me all along. Max nudged his hand with his nose. Gentle. Certain. Patient. Ethan closed his eyes again. He let the warmth of the lamp, the presence of his dog, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat fill him. The tension, the pressure, the quiet unease that had followed him for weeks, months, maybe even years, it eased. He stayed like that for a long time. Listening to his own breath, Max's soft movements, the calm of the home. There was no urgency. No need to rush. Nothing pressing him to act before he was ready. Eventually, Ethan stood slowly, testing his legs. They felt lighter. His body felt aligned with his mind. He moved toward the kitchen and poured a glass of water. The cool liquid traveled easily down his throat, soothing, normalizing, grounding. Max followed at a measured pace, sitting just off to the side, observing, patient. Ethan turned to him. I promise, he said softly. I'll listen now. I'll notice before it becomes urgent. I'll pay attention to the small signs. To the quiet signals. To you. Max's tail thumped once. Slow. Deliberate. A single gesture of affirmation, of companionship, of trust. Ethan sat back down on the couch. Max immediately lay beside him, resting his head on his leg again. The two of them existed in that moment, quiet, connected, aligned. I've been rushing, Ethan admitted aloud, as if confessing to the house itself. Chasing deadlines, deadlines, deadlines. Forgetting that life is happening while I'm pushing through. Max made a soft, contented sigh. And you've been here, Ethan continued, watching over me quietly, persistently, guiding me without words, without judgment. He chuckled softly, though his chest felt tender. I yelled at you this morning. For barking. For trying to save me. But I see now it wasn't noise. It was care. Max's eyes met Ethan's, calm, understanding. No judgment. Just patience. Ethan leaned back, resting fully against the couch. Max nestled beside him, warmth against his side. They breathed together, a rhythm now fully shared. The evening deepened. The lamps cast their soft golden light over the room. The city outside hummed quietly. And inside, there was only presence. Trust. Connection. Love unspoken but deeply felt. Ethan rested his forehead against Max's head. Thank you, he whispered. For noticing. For waiting. For staying. Max shifted slightly, a soft nudge. Affirmation. Understanding. Ethan's eyes grew moist, not from fear, not from pain, but from gratitude. From realization. From the gentle truth that the smallest presence can sometimes carry the largest weight. He sat like that for some time. Listening to the quiet. Feeling his own heartbeat. Feeling Max's warmth and steady breathing. Feeling the life that surrounds them both. Eventually, he pulled a blanket around both of them. Max adjusted immediately, comfortable, content, protective and relaxed. Ethan closed his eyes once more, breathing in the soft warmth, letting the quiet fill every corner of his mind and body. "You've saved me in ways I didn't understand," he murmured. "And now, I want to honor that. I want to listen, always." Max rested, head on his lap, trusting completely. The house was silent in the most meaningful way. Not empty. Not tense. But full of understanding, of love, of gentle mutual awareness. Ethan let himself sink into the moment. Fully. Completely. No distractions. No deadlines. No pushing forward without listening. Just presence. And in that warmth, he realized, life is quiet sometimes. Signals are subtle. Love can be persistent without shouting. And sometimes, the most profound care comes from the presence that refuses to leave your side. Ethan exhaled slowly, resting his hand gently on Max's shoulder. "You're more than a dog," he whispered. "You're my guide, my reminder, my constant." Max gave a soft, contented sigh in response. The night deepened. Lamps glowed. Shadows moved softly. And together, Ethan and Max simply existed, healed, connected, safe. The bond they shared was now fully understood. Deepened. Unspoken, yet profound. And for Ethan, that was more than enough.